Welcome to a video on the geography of minerals and metals. This video will cover the geographic distribution, formation, extraction, and utilization of minerals across the Earth's surface. We'll cover aspects of geology, economics, and geopolitics to understand where minerals are found and how they influence human activity and, for that matter, human civilization and geopolitics. First off, let's start with geology, since nature is the foundation of which human civilization sits upon, literally, and figuratively for that matter. Minerals form through geological processes like volcanic activity, sedimentation, and metamorphosis. This results in three forms of rock, which you probably learned in elementary school yet forgot. The first is igneous rock, which forms due to the cooling down of molten rock from volcanic activity. Examples of this include diamonds, as well as the rock that contains metals like nickel and copper. Next on the list is sedimentary rock, which is formed from the accumulation of, well, you guessed it, sediments from various other rocks, usually eroded by winds and waves, and is oftentimes produced by life forms, such as the calcium-dense shells of oysters, sea snails, and other marine life. Examples of this type of rock include iron ore, limestone, and sandstone. Last on the list is metamorphic rocks. These are rocks that have changed their form due to pressure, heat, and chemical reactions, among other processes. Prominent examples include slate, marble, and graphite. Marble, for example, is a type of rock that comes from limestone due to the pressure and heat, and limestone in turn is by and large produced through, well, marine life that comes from their calcium shells. Now, given the fact that Earth is a very heterogeneous place, you will see various types of mineral deposits that are disproportionately found in certain areas. Not everything is equal. Nature, by and large, does not like equality. So, for example, petroleum, oil, and by and large, hydrocarbon resources come from dead plants. They may have minerals in them, but they are overwhelmingly organic. Mineral oil is still overwhelmingly organic, as it comes from dead plant life coming from the Carboniferous era. The most prominent areas where these hydrocarbon resources are located are in the Middle East, namely the Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, etc., Russia, Venezuela, and certain parts of North America such as Texas and the Canadian province of Alberta. The easiest oil to extract is definitely from the Middle Eastern Gulf states. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and to a lesser extent Oman have become very wealthy due to these hydrocarbon resources and have by and large enacted policies that look for long-term stability and diversification. Qatar, for example, is a very small country, essentially a city-state, but due to its large natural gas deposits has become a leader in liquefied natural gas exports, and as a result has become very wealthy. Russia also is a major leader in natural gas, by and large providing natural gas for Europeans. Venezuela has a very large set of oil reserves, but by and large has not been able to utilize them effectively due to a great deal of corruption. In Europe, you have Norway and the North Sea, north of Scotland, which also has offshore natural gas, making those parts of Europe disproportionately wealthy. In North America, the state of Texas, along with the province of Canada known as Alberta, are also rich in hydrocarbon resources. Alberta is very wealthy, in fact, the most wealthy province of Canada for this reason. However, at the same time, much of the oil here is shale oil and by and large requires a great deal of ecological damage and economic investment to make use of this oil in comparison to, say, that of the Gulf states. It's worth noting that many like to reduce American foreign policy in the Middle East down to oil, but the truth is that the US is a net exporter of oil. And not only does the US have Texas for oil, but also has Alaska. And on top of that, North Dakota has been a major center of natural gas extraction through the use of fracking. Next on the list is iron ore. Iron is extremely important, quite possibly the most important metal in our bodies and outside our bodies. Iron is essential for our diets. It's not that though we eat iron per se, that would be, well, weird and impossible, but rather that there are traces of iron in our diets that we require for our hemoglobin, which is a molecule structure within our blood. Without hemoglobin, we couldn't breathe, as it is required to transport oxygen throughout the body. On top of that, iron has played an essential role throughout human history. Before iron, we primarily were reliant on bronze, made up of copper and tin. But bronze, by and large, is pretty hard to produce, as tin was not that common before modern times. Iron, on the other hand, is extremely common. It has a higher smoke point than copper and tin, but it is also highly utilizable. Is utilizable a word? Probably not, but I'm still going to use it. It is highly utilized. Since the Iron Age and the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapsed, iron and its various alloys, such as steel, which usually requires the mixing of iron and carbon, have become the dominant metal of our civilization. It's sturdy, resilient, and easy to produce in mass. Today, some of the largest iron producers are Australia, Brazil, India, and China. Canada and South Korea also produce a great deal of steel through the, again, combination of iron, magnesium, and carbon. The United States state of Pennsylvania also was a major center of steel production, primarily from the city of Pittsburgh. However, it is now known as the Rust Belt, as it by and large has become deindustrialized. Now, I mentioned that the Iron Age overtook the Bronze Age after the Bronze Age collapse, but it's worth pointing out that copper and tin are still extremely important. Tin is by and large used in cans, and given the fact that we have more productive and extractive uses of mining today through technology than we did in the past, tin is no longer as rare as it used to be. Today, tin is oftentimes associated with cheap quality, used for cans of beans and other products that by and large are not particularly expensive. Copper, on the other hand, is a by and large semi-precious metal known for its beautiful color. It's nowhere near as coveted as gold or silver, but I would argue that it is far more important. If you are using an electrical device right now, which you almost certainly are, you have copper to thank. Copper is the primary metal used for electrical wiring. Today, one of the most important producers of copper is the South American nation of Chile, with close contenders being neighboring nations such as Bolivia, Argentina, and a little further off, Peru. The Atacama Desert of Chile is very rich in natural resources, namely minerals and metals such as copper. On top of that, this region is also extremely rich in lithium. A disproportionate amount of the lithium in the world comes from South America, namely the nations of Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. As we move away from hydrocarbon resources into renewable energy, the use of lithium and copper will be essential. We no longer may need to rely on diesel or petroleum engines and instead rely on electric vehicles, as well as solar panels. The batteries and electrical wiring will require lithium and copper. And this may perhaps make the South American nation some of the richest in the world. Chile is already the richest nation in Latin America Bolivia is unfortunately the poorest, but perhaps with some good public policy and the revenue generated by these resources, South America can become a major player as we move away from fossil fuel dependency. And hopefully, the Middle Eastern nations and the Gulf states that I previously mentioned will have, by that point, diversified their economies. Next on the list is the most famous metal of all, gold. Now, gold by and large is not particularly useful directly. It's a soft metal. You can't use it for weapons. You can't really use it for building, well, buildings. But it is really shiny and pretty. Some argue that the reason why we find shiny objects, including metals, beautiful is because they look wet. And to a species like humans who evolved on the African savanna, looking at things that were wet may have been appealing because we wanted access to water. And given that yellow is the brightest color outside of white, a bright yellow metal would have been especially appealing. On top of that, gold is not particularly common, so a scarcity produced demand. Today, gold is primarily found in sub-Saharan Africa, namely the nation of South Africa. South Africa is one of the wealthiest countries in the African continent, but it also faces drastic income inequality. To what extent the gold industry is responsible for this dynamic is debatable. It is worth noting, however, that the importance of gold has faded over time. In the past, many countries used the gold standard, tying their currency to gold, or literally used gold itself. Today, most countries have not pegged their currency to the gold standard, including the United States, which dropped it during the 1970s, and the UK, which dropped it during the 1930s. Some people still hold on to gold as it has supposed value, but nonetheless, it's difficult to imagine us moving back to the gold standard, as that would mean tying the value of the global economy to how much gold could be extracted from South Africa. And given that the world has become a far larger, more faster growing, more innovative place than a South African gold mine or series of gold mines, let's just say I doubt we're going to go back to that system soon. At the end of the day, what creates value is not a shiny metal, but rather the trust in value. It's also worth noting that there are a number of other secondary regions of the planet that are rich in mineral wealth. As a Canadian, I have to mention the Canadian Shield. This is a part of Canada that barely anyone lives in, across much of Western and Northern Ontario, stretching all the way through to roughly a third to half of the country, depending on your definition. This is an area that barely has any topsoil. The bedrock is very close to the actual surface. As a result of this, it's terrible for farming, terrible for human habitation. It's also really cold, but it's great for mining. This area is rich in high-grade nickel and aluminum, and to a lesser extent, copper and gold. Much of the Canadian Shield in Quebec is also rich in aluminum. Contrary to what Donald Trump might say, Canadian aluminum and nickel is essential for the production of American planes for the Air Force. While the Canadian Shield does provide a lot of jobs in mining, it also creates a great deal of problems for the nation of Canada, as it really splits the nation into various separate nations, as the hard-traversed landscapes end up creating a deep divide between Eastern and Western Canada on an economic, cultural, and political level. Next on the list is the African Plateau. Now, Sub-Saharan Africa, as I mentioned before, is very rich in mineral resources, including diamonds, the aforementioned gold, platinum, as well as copper found in the Congo, and cobalt, which is essential for the production of cell phones and other electronic devices. This has become deeply controversial, as many of these regions, or many of these countries, I should say, face a great deal of political and military instability. There's a great deal of exploitation behind the extraction of these resources, but at the same time, we are dependent on these resources in these particular areas to produce the electronic and technological marvels that we use. I don't know what the best solution to this problem is. I'm just glad I'm not the one making the decision. The last major region that is very rich in minerals is Australia. Now, the interior of Australia is sparsely populated, in sharp contrast to the coast where most people live in major cities. In the Australian outback, you'll find iron ore, uranium, gold, and coal, and along with a variety of other minerals. Western Australia, in particular, centered around the city of Perth, has become one of the mining capitals of the world. It experienced a mining boom during the 2000s and early 2010s. However, that has by and large subsided. Much of Australia's population in general has to do with gold rushes, after all. This is not because Australia is uniquely rich in minerals, but rather because one, the landmass is gigantic, and two, its contemporary history, which involved the mining and extraction of minerals and metals, has been relatively recent, given that the Aboriginals did not produce complex societies. As a result of these factors, Australia has become a premier mining nation. It's rather unusual given that Australia is one of the richest countries in the world, yet if you look at its export tree map, it resembles more of an African country than a European country. Now, it's worth keeping in mind that the widespread extraction of minerals in a country may be good or bad depending on various factors. Some people think that if you have a bunch of minerals, you will automatically get rich since minerals are, well, highly coveted. On the other hand, others speak of a resource curse, in which having a great deal of minerals can make you open for exploitation by others. On some level, both of these are true, but they're also gross oversimplifications. The reality is that there are a whole ton of factors that result in some countries making use of their mineral resources and others not so much. Both the UAE and the Congo are very rich in natural resources when it comes to hydrocarbons and minerals. However, one became incredibly wealthy and the other one became a failed state. It's worth keeping in mind that our decisions as a populace, along with those of our leaders, elected or not, play a pivotal role in whether or not our societies will succeed or fail. Geography sets the foundation, but it is not destiny. Thanks for watching.